go ahead and grab your sleeve, and we're going to sew a flat sleeve. So now that we have our shoulders sewn, what you want to do is now open up your garment, and we're going to work in the armhole area. So this is the back and this is the front of the duster, and you want to make sure that the wrong side is facing up. Next, you want to grab your sleeve, and you want to make sure also that the wrong side is facing up. And what we're going to do is we're going to find our notches that are in our sleeve and align those with the notches in our coat. And make sure that they're the same. So right here I have 2 notches in my sleeve, and I have 2 notches here on my jacket. What I'm going to do is now pin those with the right sides together, lining up those notches. And then on this side of the sleeve there's 1 notch, and then there should be 1 notch here. And now I'm going to pin these 2. Now I'm going to pin these 2 with the right sides now facing each other. Alright, so now is where we will begin to adjust our gathers. So you'll see you have a total of 4 threads. You only want to work with 2 of the threads that are on the side facing you. So what you want to begin to do is pull those gathers. So I'm pulling these 2 threads, and these are creating the gathers in the sleeve. Next, what you want to do is the dot that we made here on our sleeve, you want to line that up with the dot on the back of the jacket. So I see I have my dot here, and then my dot is there. So I'm going to line those 2 up and place a pin, making sure that the right sides are facing each other. And then also we had a center dot on our sleeve, so you want to find where that is. And you want to align this center dot on your sleeve with this seam allowance here. And you're going to pin those right sides together. Now you want to make sure that this fits in here. If you need to gather or you need to let out some gathers, this is the time to do it. So I see that mine is fitting good. So I'm just going to distribute these gathers that I have right in here evenly. And then I'm going to place another pin. Alright, and then we have 1 more dot that we marked on our sleeve, and we have another dot here on our coat. Alright, so I'm going to line those 2 up with each other. And pin in place. And you can distribute any of the gathers. You can distribute the gathers. And place another pin. And then lastly, you can go ahead and add some additional pins here at the end of the sleeve. Alright, now we will take this to our machine and we're going to sew a 5/8 of an inch to attach our sleeve. All right, go ahead and line up your sleeve with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and lower your needle, begin sewing, and backstitch. And it's okay to go slow on this part. Now that our sleeve is in, we're going to go ahead and sew up our side seams. So now you can pick up your jacket. So now it's time to pin this all together. So starting at our sleeve, I'm going to pin the bottom together. And then right here in the armhole, I'm going to make sure that these two seams line up with one another, and I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm going to add some additional pins to this arm, to this sleeve. Alright, next I'm going to pin along this edge here. And then here at the top of our pocket, you want to find where we made that notch in our pocket. Okay, and you want to mark that. Now I'm going to put 2 pins just so I know that when I get to it, this is going to be a stopping point. So I marked the top of my pocket with 2 pins to let me know to stop. And then I'm going to add some pins along the bottom. Alright, now add some pins along the pocket. Now find where we made the notch in the bottom of our pocket. And I'm also going to mark this with 2 pins. Okay, so now, alright, now we're going to sew up this side seam. So first, we're going to start down at the bottom of our duster. We'll sew all the way up until we get to our double pins. Then we'll bring it around the pocket and stop here. Then, after we're done with that, we will start at the bottom of our sleeve. We will work our way around and then come all the way down until we get to our double pins here at the top of our pocket. Alright, let's go ahead and do that. Alright, to sew up the side seam, we're going to start at the bottom of our jacket, and we're lining the edge up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and lower your needle, begin sewing, backstitch, and we're going to sew all the way up until we get to that bottom notch in our pocket. Bottom notch in the pocket, so I'm going to keep sewing until I get there. Okay, once you're there, go ahead and backstitch and stitch forward again. Make sure your needle is left down. Raise up your presser foot, begin to turn your jacket, and now we're going to keep sewing up this pocket at a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So lower your presser foot and keep sewing. And I'm making sure that my pocket is lined up with 5/8 of an inch. then also as I'm sewing, I am pivoting and applying pressure to turn my pocket. Now to finish up this side seam, go ahead and now we're going to start at the bottom of our sleeve, and I'm going to line that up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and lower your needle, begin sewing, back stitch, and we're going to sew all the way down until we get to that top notch in our pocket. Alright, now I'm getting close to those pins at the top of my pocket, so I'm going to keep going until I meet that point. And then once I'm there, I'm going to back stitch, stitch forward, and back stitch once more. Next, go ahead and grab your interfacing and pattern pieces 3 and 4. So what you want to do is have with your interfacing, the rough side, which is the glue dots, make sure that's facing up. And then you want to take your neck facings and you want to put that right on top, and make sure that the wrong side of your fabric is touching the glue dots, and you're going to do that for all of your pieces. Next, you want to go ahead and pin this in place along the outer edges. And then you want to go ahead and cut this out. Alright, next you want to flip your pieces over, and you can take a pressing cloth. This is just a piece of muslin, and you want to remove your pins because we're getting ready to use our iron. So you would lay your pressing cloth on top, take your iron, turn it to a wool setting, and you would hold it on there firmly in place and just press it down. No need to move your iron, don't do that, just hold it firmly in place. Then you would pick it up, remove your pin, and you would continue holding it and pressing down. Now if you find that your interfacing is not fusing to your fabric, you can go ahead and turn up your iron to a cotton setting and and use a higher temperature if it's not fusing properly. Next, go ahead and turn your pattern pieces with the right side facing up. We're going to attach pattern pieces 3 and 4. So they're on, I think this is pattern piece number 3, or this is 4. Well, there's a notch here, and then on this pattern piece there was a notch here. You want to align those with the right sides together and find where that notch is on both of those and pin there, and you can add an additional pin, and you'll do the same thing on the other side, finding the notch, making sure that it lines up with the notch here, and pin. Go ahead and line up the facing with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and begin sewing, back stitch, and sew until you get to the end and back stitch again. Alright, so I went ahead and turned my jacket with the right side facing out, and then I pinned my facing to the top of the collar. So I have the right side of the collar facing the right side of the jacket. So on the jacket and on the facing there are 2 notches. So I pin there, and then also I went ahead and aligned the facing seam allowance with the jacket seam allowance, and I put a pin there. And there was also another seam on the other side, and I pinned there. Now I'm going to pin the remaining of the facing to the jacket, and then we're going to sew a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to attach the facing to the jacket. Attach the facing. We're going to start at the bottom of the facing, and we're going to sew up using a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then we'll stop right about here, because this is about 5/8 of an inch away, and then we will pivot and continue sewing. So go ahead and lower your needle, begin sewing, back stitch. I'm going to keep sewing. Then I'm going to leave my needle inside, raise my presser foot, and now turn the facing. Now I have my facing back at 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and I'm going to keep sewing. Alright, when you're about 5/8 of an inch away from the edge, go ahead and stop, lower your needle, lift up your presser foot, and turn. Put your presser foot back down, make sure your back lined up with 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and keep sewing. When you get to the end, go ahead and back stitch. Let's go ahead, right in this corner here, we need to trim this down. We'll do that on both sides. Alright, next we need to layer our seam allowance. So what that means is, right now we have the facing seam and we also have the jacket seam. So what we're going to do is trim the facing seam allowance, and that's the one that has the interfacing. So I'm going to trim that down. So to about 1/4 of an inch. Alright, next we need to clip this inner curve. So all along this neck curve area, what we're going to do is just clip the curve. So that means I just cut into that curve, but I did not cut through the stitches. So I'm going to do that a few times. Now go ahead and take this clipped seam allowance and press it going towards the facing. So the facing also, we're pressing all of this away from our jacket. We're going to press it up. So once we have it nicely pressed away from our jacket, what we're going to do is do an understitch. So what that means is we're going to sew a stitch in the seam allowance very close to the stitching that we already have. So right up in here, we will sew a stitch right up in there. Alright, so to create our understitch, we're making another line that is close to our original stitch line. So here's my original stitch line, and I'm creating another row of stitches to do an understitch. Now, we're not going to be able to start all the way up here on our collar. So without having anything else underneath the facing and without having anything underneath your facing. So if I were to start up here, I would be catching the jacket and the facing, and we don't want that. We only want to be sewing on the seam allowance and the facing. So for me, that's about 4 inches down away from the top of the collar. So just go ahead and begin sewing. you're sewing as close to your stitch line as possible. Do not sew on top of the stitches. Just get as close as you can. After you have finished your understitching, now you can go ahead and turn your facing to the right side is out now. So right in those corners of our facing, you can go ahead and push that out. And you'll take this to your iron and go ahead and press. And if you need to make any additional clippings, you can turn it back to the inside if your collar is not laying flat. Alright, now that we have our collar nice and pressed so that this facing won't be moving as we're wearing it, we're going to tack it down to the seam allowance only. So right here in the seam allowance, so grab a needle and thread, and what I'm going to do is at the bottom of the facing, I'm going to attach it to the seam allowance here. Alright, now it is time to hem our center front edges. So what you want to do is turn your garment to make sure that the wrong side is facing out, and you want to grab your index card or your seam gauge. Now on my index card, I've drawn a line that measures up 5/8 of an inch from the bottom, and I'm going to use that to create the narrow hem. So what you want to do is take the index card and you want to fold up this edge to meet the 5/8 of an inch line. And then you want to take your iron and you want to press. And you're going to do that the entire way. Now once you do that the entire way down, then what you're going to do is you will then open it back up and you're going to fold. Then you're going to fold this outer edge to meet that crease that we just made by ironing. Then you'll fold it again, and you'll take your iron and press that out. And this creates the narrow hem. The raw edge is hidden on the inside and you have a nice clean finish. So you're going to do that along both of the center front edges as well as your hem. You will do the same process for your hem. Alright, starting at the top of your jacket in the collar area, go ahead and line up your line it up with the presser foot and lower your needle. And I'm on the right side of my fabric now. Go ahead and begin sewing, back stitch, and we're going to sew all the way down until we get to our hem, and then we will pivot. Alright, when you get close to the bottom, we're getting ready to pivot. So get close to the edge and leave your needle inside of your fabric. Lift up your presser foot and turn. Alright, now we're going to continue sewing the bottom edge of our duster and make sure it's lined up with your presser foot. And then when we get to the end, we will pivot and continue sewing the other side. Alright, so I'm nearing the end of the bottom of my hem, so I'm going to keep going. And now I'm close to the edge. I'm going to leave my needle in my fabric, lift up my presser foot, and go ahead and turn. And now I'm going to keep sewing all the way back up to the top of the collar and still keeping my fabric aligned with the presser foot. Alright, right, once you get back up to the top, go ahead and back stitch. All right, last step is go ahead and press everything out. So where we just sewed all of our hems, on the center front and on the bottom, go ahead and press it out and you are all finished. Alright, this concludes the tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and comment down below. Ask me any questions. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe to my channel and head over to the blog if you would like to see more pictures. I have images of the full length duster as well as the midi length. And if you haven't subscribed to my blog, please subscribe and you will have access to all the free sewing resources that I have for you. Alright, until the next project.